They knew that last night.
I know you maintain your client case. Lawyers are coming to this sort of victimizing people all over again by having to clear up for the press and then cancel the last second. Any thoughts about that?
Well, there's a lot of thoughts about that. If in fact these young men were abused as children, then obviously there's a real issue as to whether or not they're being victimized by the process, not by us, but by the process. But on the other hand, ladies and gentlemen, if Jerry Sandusky is innocent, if he's innocent, which he has maintained, then maybe he's being victimized because he's going through this process. He's being followed day and night. He can't leave his house. Of course, now he's under house arrest. But media has been outside his home 24/7 for the last 5.5 weeks. So to answer your question, if in fact it turns out that these young men were victimized, were in fact victims, then certainly the process is causing them great hardship again. But that's the nature of the legal process. But on the other hand, Jerry has maintained his innocence, and as most of you know, in the legal process we have a great system that people who are charged with offenses are simply charged. They're not guilty, they're presumed to be innocent. And all we've asked from the media is to give Jerry Sandusky that opportunity to prove his innocence in a court of law. Today was a small part in this legal process. It was a part which would have been very one-sided, which would have been basically the Commonwealth's opportunity to represent all the allegations it's made without us having a chance to defend against them effectively. So based upon discussions with the prosecution and based upon their interest in providing us with discovery at an earlier time than maybe normally would be the case, we decided to waive today's proceeding.
Joe.
Yes.
What did the defense gain by waiving today?
We gained an assurance from the Commonwealth they'll give us discovery earlier than we normally would get it. We gained the assurance that the Commonwealth will not try to raise bail. And we also avoided the prospect of what all you folks would have done tonight. You would have reported the testimony today of the various Commonwealth witnesses. And all you would have heard would have been the Commonwealth's case, not our case, because today's not the time and place for us to present our defense. And I think, realistically, all that would have done is reaffirm what many of you already think, that Jerry Sandusky was guilty and that he committed these offenses. And I thought that put him in a very unfair position, especially with all the coverage that there would have been concerning this hearing. So when we waited, and I'll be honest with you, this was a very close call. We really debated whether or not to waive this proceeding because we knew no matter which way we went, there'd be fallout. And obviously what you're telling us today is there's fallout from that perspective. But there were a lot of thought that went into this, a lot of considerations, but we felt at the end of the day that the better part of our case, knowing what we know, and we're very well prepared, but knowing what we know and knowing how this proceeding would go, that it was better to waive the hearing.
Mr. Amendola,
Joe.
what possible motive would there be for 10 young men now to come forward and falsely accuse Mr. Sandusky?
I can think of 9 million right off the top of my head with Second Mile in terms of their assets. I can think of countless millions when I think of Penn State and the deep pockets. Do you realize that many of these young men already have civil attorneys for the lawsuits that are being filed, have been filed, or will be filed? What greater motivation, and I hate to say it, but it's going to be part of our case and we're checking on it now, what greater motivation could there be than money? I've seen money break up families. I've seen siblings become enemies fighting over their parents' assets after their parents pass away. So what greater motivation, folks, could there be than the financial gain that could come out of this by saying I'm a victim?
Joe, what part of, excuse me, Joe.
Let me get somebody, I'll get back to you.
Mr. Amendola, do you have any plans to enter plea deal negotiations?
No. This is, Jerry has maintained it, and again, for those of you who just got into this case in early November when charges were filed, Jerry maintained his innocence in the first case involving accuser number 1 when it was a Children and Youth Services proceeding in Clinton County in 2008. That's when I first got involved in Jerry's case, when he came to me and said, Joe, I got a notice from CYS, Children and Youth Services, alleging that I abused this child. He said, I did not do it, I'm innocent, I want to defend against it. That allegation, which started off as a fondling case, grew into an all-out sexual contact case over several months, and it became evident to me that Jerry was going to be charged at some point criminally. That From that point on, where Jerry maintained his innocence, he has maintained his innocence consistently. He has provided me with a wealth of information which leads me to believe that he may well be innocent, certainly deserving of his day in court, at trial, not a preliminary hearing, which is not a trial, but at trial to establish his innocence. He remains totally prepared and committed to proving his innocence, and in fact, we're proceeding on that premise, and that's why we have additional counsel, and we anticipate there'll be some other volunteers, which is interesting also, folks, because over the last 5 weeks, what started as no one believing Jerry Sandusky, we now have people actually calling us, offering to help, saying, you know what, you've made some good points, and now we're starting to wonder about whether or not these acts actually occurred. And we're going to continue with that premise. We're going to continue to develop Jerry's defense, and we anticipate a trial later in 2012. Let me get some people over here. If I understand, because I had a little trouble hearing you, if I understand you correctly, why is Mike McQuarrie's credibility such a big factor? And the answer is, Mike McQuarrie was the centerpiece of this prosecution. Everywhere I went, every time I heard someone speak, they would say to me, well, we can understand how he said, how somebody now, a young man, said Jerry Sandusky abused him. But why would Mike McQuarrie say that? Why would Mike McQuarrie say, an assistant coach at Penn State, a former quarterback under Sandusky, while Sandusky was here at Penn State as a coach? So Mike McQuarrie wouldn't make up a story. Well, the fact remains, folks, you're all reasonable people, you're all intelligent. Think about this factual pattern. If you believe that Mike McQuarrie went into the shower room at Penn State on a Friday night in March of 2002, saw Jerry Sandusky anally assaulting a 10-year-old looking boy, walked out of there without offering to help that child, without offering to call the police on his cell phone, and by the way, Penn State police were 30 seconds away from that building, went home and talked to his dad, who didn't tell him to call the police, simply went to Joe Paterno the next day and said he saw what he saw. Joe Paterno then went to Tim Curley and told Tim Curley whatever he told Tim Curley, and Tim Curley's response, if you believe Mike McQuarrie, when Mike McQuarrie says he told Tim Curley he saw Jerry Sandusky engaging in anal sex with a 10-year-old looking child in the shower room, Tim Curley's reaction was to tell Jerry Sandusky, simply don't go in the shower anymore with kids. Does that make any sense? Does that make any sense to anybody that something like that could have been conveyed? Tim Curley, I'll say this about Tim Curley and Gary Schultz and Coach Paterno. They're not my personal friends, so I don't speak from a friendship standpoint, but they are very good people. They are very conservative people. They are people who care about kids. And if you think for a minute, if anyone is naive enough to think for a minute that Tim Curley, Joe Paterno, and Gary Schultz, and for that matter, Graham Spanier, the university president, were told by Mike McQuarrie that he observed Jerry Sandusky having anal sex with a 10-year-old looking kid in a shower room at Penn State, on Penn State property, and her response was simply to tell Jerry Sandusky that don't go in the shower room anymore with kids, I suggest you dial 1-800-REALITY, because that makes absolutely no sense.